Well, I'm pleased to host a panel today with some of the my founder friends who are building the infrastructure needed to get agents into production. That's the whole aim of this conference. So let me not take up too much time. If each one of you would do a quick intro on who you are, what the company is, and maybe for since a lot of our audience are founders, some sense of like the size of your company. So
All right, my name is Anurag Goel. I'm the founder and CEO of Render. Render is a cloud application platform for both traditional web applications and AI apps and agents. So if you're using AWS, you should look at Render. The company now has several million developers on it. We're adding about 400,000 new developers every month. And we raised our last round at a valuation of $1.5 billion.
Hi everyone, I'm Michel. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Airbyte. Airbyte is the leading open source project when it comes to accessing data. And today we're very focused on getting more access to data to agents. So how do you access it? How do you write it? How do you make sense of everything that your company is producing every single day? We have more than 300,000 deployment of Airbyte today.
Hey everyone, I'm Gideon, Mendels, CEO and co-founder of Comet. We're the company behind OPIK, which is the fastest growing open source project for agent evaluation optimization. We cover the entire end-to-end from basic tracing to actually processing production traces and automatically optimizing your agents with RL. We're a post-Series B company. We have about 50,000 monthly active users on OPIK. We power some of the best AI teams out there, Uber, Netflix, JPMC, and a bunch of others.
Hi everyone, I'm Soham. We're building Composio. Composio is like a tool harness that allows you to build agents that connect and work on top of knowledge work applications very nicely and intelligently. We are a post-Series A company. We have probably more than 1 million developers now who build on top of us, and some of the largest enterprise application like companies like AWS or Glean who use us in their own sort of product.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So for this panel specifically, we're going to talk about infrastructure challenges with getting agents from prototyping into production. Common topic if you've done the conference circuit recently. But let's start with you, Anurag. So, one could say that a server is a server. Why do we need a different runtime for AI agents? What's fundamentally different here that requires new architecture?
Yeah, so we are also organizing our very first user conference later today. It's called Localhost. You can go to localhost.render.com. I'm going to talk more about it then, but I'll give you a preview. So agents fundamentally, and not just agents, any kind of LLM-driven app is different because the runtime requirements are not fixed when you first deploy the application. So in the old world, you had, and I mean, we still do this, your code is maybe for a web service, and you know exactly what kind of resources it needs because it's going to serve some web requests, and you can kind of define statically something on render that says, well, here's a web service, here's a worker, here's a queue, a database, and so on. Now, when you enter an agent and a user asks a question, the first thing an agent might need to do is look up 10 records. The next thing might be 40. The one after that might be 400. And it's not just the number of records, it's also the diversity of tasks. And then you also have to maintain state across a series of different tasks. You have to make sure that things can get retried because obviously there's a lot of failures. And fundamentally, the application is no longer in control of the infrastructure needed to run all of this dynamic compute. And that, to me, is the biggest shift that we're seeing when we see all of these agentic companies running on Render. And I think it's a really interesting, really exciting place to innovate. And a lot of companies are doing that, including Render.
Yeah, I have like a soapbox thing on like, we can't really use our old microservices approach to building this stateful machine. I mean, microservices were intentionally designed to be stateless. And a lot of the maybe I'll turn it over to well, the rest of the panel. Honestly, there's this kind of tension between like predefining what context and tools and resources the agents have, as opposed to maybe doing something like Composio and discovering tools at runtime. How do like builders building agents, that want to scale in production, balance these trade-offs on where to put that context?
Yeah, I think in general, like the trend that we're seeing is the less scaffolding, the better, right? Like I think it started with people really putting a lot of scaffolding around agents and trying to like kind of inject logic and system prompts and tool descriptions and then like over time as the models obviously got better, the less you do that, the better. And if you kind of follow that trend, this approach of like let the agent actually discover the tools even without predefining them seems to me like something that makes sense. Obviously, like the search space needs to be like reasonable, and how do you do that is still a hard problem. But it's clearly that like the more responsibility you give to the model, it tends to perform better.
So I'd love to hear like if you've seen any like common failure modes or have a take here.
Yeah, yeah. I think like if you think about like pretty much like what any labs are looking at, like or like how sort of anyone is thinking, it's like model is becoming more and more intelligent, and so you pretty much are better off just like reducing the surface area of hardness and making sure that like all the sort of decision making goes into like, hey, how do I just use this bash tool the right way to pretty much execute any task, or how do I just like use the minimal surface area available sort of in a very smart way so that I can execute anything. What Composio tries to do is we are sort of way more bullish on intelligent harnesses, where like could I adopt to the surface area of what model is trying to do, not to sort of make it more accurate but to make it more efficient. So think about it this way: if I know that there's a workflow is kind of a tooling in between like an agentic task, could I essentially extract that insight and like convert it into like a dynamic tool and like put that tool out back into the harness? So just harness becomes far more efficient in what it does. It's almost like everyone uses the same iPhone, but they all kind of like personalize it to their own taste, right? And that is super powerful because like my phone is so much geared towards me that I'm just way more efficient using it, right?
Yeah, so maybe Michael, for the data like ETL type of workflows, have these changed?
Yeah, I think it's basically we've created a new consumer for data. Like, a lot of how you actually pick and select data that you need to use for a specific workflow has been driven a lot by humans, and it's based on like all the organic knowledge that they've built over the years. And when you're starting to connect this data into agents, you need to basically regenerate a bit of that knowledge behind the scene. And yes, you need to have the ability to provide tools to your agents so that they can access these different pieces of data, but that's not enough. Like what you need is you need to provide the most accurate data so that the context is not bloated. You don't provide the wrong data point to the agents to perform their task. And when you're thinking about data, like the concept of relationship and entity definition and how you index the data for search is becoming extremely critical for this type of workload. And yeah, this is something that, with the expertise we have in shoving as much data as possible into data warehouses and now into our own search engine is basically how do we create all these relationships across all these different silos of data so that the agent does not reason in terms of this single data source, but actually across like multiple of them, and is able to make the relationship possible between all these silos so that they can have like the 360 view of every piece and every entity that is required for the task.
Yeah, I hear that as a common response, and honestly, it frustrates me a little bit because not to say that you're wrong, but I operate at a startup that has a lot of messy data, and our BI tools never match like our invoicing or billing, and doesn't match our data warehouse raw tables. And startups will tell me, look, our agent would have worked if you had like properly labeled everything and had a really nice table. I'm like, well, that's the point. I want to throw all my messy data into your agent. Like, I want the agent to figure out what's relevant. Yeah, do you have any like responses to like trying to get agents ready and productive without all the hand kind of data engineering work?
Yeah, I think in a way, like building the infrastructure, like the way you access the data is changing, but the way you actually process that data, I mean, there are already a lot of technology that exists today that have been proven. You just need to really, I think you can just go a step further than that. Like, before when you're doing data management, like you need to be thinking about structured data, and structured data was this gold mine that no one wanted to touch because it's too hard to work with. And I think what we've got with LLM is really this ability to just exploit that massive silo and just connect it across all these systems. LLMs are becoming smarter and smarter every single day. So I think what we need to do here is not invest too much in all the scaffolding that goes around it, and just trust that what we have today is just going to be 10x better in the future for everything that is related to data. But what will remain is this ability to discover what is available, because that's the only way you make sure that the agent can actually access it.
That's an interesting take, especially with all the harness engineering stuff going on. I want to move, though, to another topic that's really relevant from our audience. And by the way, we're going to do the last 15 minutes will be audience questions. So just keep thinking of questions, and if we could get a mic to pass around. So this is the question about cost. And I don't know, I miss Fable a lot, but it killed my wallet. And then there's less about like just the prosumer cost, and also as a startup, if you're building an agent, it's not necessarily true that you will benefit from some sort of scaling law as your product scales. So maybe starting with OPIC, talk to me a little bit about how folks can control their costs, and then how they can think about cost as related to like pricing and scaling up their agents.
Yeah, totally. So like, I think there's like two categories of like cost for agents that you build, and then coding agents, which is like slightly different. So for like in-house built agents, really like the question of cost becomes much more relevant when you can measure quality, right? Because if you know how well your agent is performing using some sort of evaluation, then you can easily test like a cheaper model, right? It's like, and we've had customers that did that, and then like very clearly, okay, the cheaper model tier gives me the same performance, or the hit is something that I don't care much about, and it's very, very easy. But of course, like being able to evaluate the agent is extremely hard, right? So that's kind of like one perspective. In a more granular level, like just being able to see what the agent does, something that you built in-house, all the spans, all the tool calls, what is it burning tokens on, just that level of visibility tends to lend itself to the ability to make your agent better, but also often just by eyeballing this kind of stuff, you see, oh, okay, like I'm burning all this stuff. I didn't realize that's getting fed into the token, into the context over and over again. And coding like Cloud Code, Codex and stuff. So I think most startups hopefully are benefiting from like the monthly plans before Anthropic, shuts that down on us. And we start paying per token too. I mean, they did it for enterprises like 3 months ago, and they're now all scrambling. But this is like, so one of our very large customers came to us with this like, hey, you're helping us on cost on the agent that we built. What about Cloud Code and Codex? So we actually took a look, and we launched something like 2 weeks ago. It's called OPIC Cost Intelligence. And basically we kind of intercept all the Cloud Code sessions and the Codex sessions, and we analyze what happens, tool calls, context, LM calls, and so on and so on. And like what was like shocking to me is like the default configuration for Cloud Code is like, I mean, I don't know, maybe they're moving fast, maybe it's deliberate, but it's like burning tokens like it shouldn't. Like it's the differences are massive. We were talking about this one configuration. So you have like a max bash output configuration in Cloud Code. If you lower that, Claude will save it to disk and then just run grep calls to find the same amount of data. If you don't, obviously, if it's big or the default, it keeps being refed to context. We did it with one of our customers. We lowered it. Obviously, there's no performance impact, maybe some latency. It's like 4% annual reduction on the entire Anthropic bill. Like, and that's just one. We found like 50 of these things. So yeah, it's And they don't have the incentive to actually improve it, but it was still eye-opening.
So a lot of our customers, for them back in the day, their infrastructure cloud costs were sort of the big part of what they were spending in the cloud, and now the cloud costs are a tiny, tiny part of their overall spend, which is great for me because I can just be like, well, they don't argue about cost with me anymore.
Nice.
And when we talk to them about what they're doing to manage these token costs, um, look, ultimately, you have to figure out uh, whether you actually need the frontier model for something or not. And that to me is by far the biggest difference you can make to your final cost. And we see lots of companies. So, for example, Base 44 is one of the biggest vibe coding platforms in the world. They run on Render, and they've been doing lots of cost engineering, mostly by splitting out the pieces of their application that can talk to cheaper models. And it's being done more and more by larger companies where the token spends are really massive, where something like this can make a big difference. I think that's going to start happening with startups as well. This is why you see all the inference companies, Base 10 together and others doing really, really well. It's all coming down to cost, and it's all going to happen as people separate out the things that truly need frontier capabilities versus others that are good enough for the rest of your apps.
So do you know how those how folks are distinguishing between those things that need smaller models?
Yeah, I mean, some things are just sort of straightforward. For example, if you're trying to classify a piece of text, I think that is pretty easy to do with some of the open weight models. But if you're doing something more complicated, like really actually generating code based on what the user said, for that, I think they still want to use the best model possible. But there are all these ancillary things that you have to use LLMs for, and a lot of those things become candidates for reducing costs.
Yeah. One of the things that we've been thinking about at our company is like open source and local models. But we found when we run the math that it still doesn't make sense. And it's exacerbated by the fact that the research labs are like throwing free credits at us all the time when we complain about the bill. So I think this is something we'll have to grapple with definitely in the near future. But for now, it's just something to think about. And likely if you make a big stink, you can get away with some credits. Just a word of advice.
I can probably add one thing. I think like today the biggest cost in most organizations are cloud code or cloud cowork or something like that. I think that's going to change phenomenally. You saw coding growing like 1000x in pretty much last 2 years, and like agents coding essentially growing that quickly. I think you will see knowledge work agents pretty much growing the same rate in next 2 years. And so the cloud cowork cost is not going to be the major component. It's going to be the knowledge work background agents that are sort of doing work for you. And when that happens, you pretty much have like two ways to sort of go about it. You could optimize the model. And so you could go with open models, you can go with like some sort of RL tune models, like a bunch of other sort of things exist. Or you can go and like figure out essentially via some smart eval, smart observability, how do you sort of optimize the harness that is associated to that knowledge work background agent. And I think a lot of like actually juice can be squeezed there. Like even if you look at like code mode, which recently sort of became a mainstream thing, you pretty much look at like token utilization like being lower by 95%, or something similar to that for a lot of different sort of widely ranging tasks. And that's crazy, right? And I think a lot of work has to be done towards cost optimizing via specialized harnesses built for like specialized sort of agents. And yeah, that probably is going to be like the next set of focus.
Yeah, on the code side, I tend to agree on this one, which is I think right now everyone is going nuts on coding because this is a super powerful tool. But at the end of the day, yes, there are going to be costs associated to it, but there are also going to be a very like massive productivity gain that will offset that cost. Now, when it comes to actually building like background agents or more like data intensive agents, it all boils down to like the accuracy of what you're feeding, like how much you're feeding the context with data. And when we started to talk about, hey, how do I fit data into my model? 2 years ago, everyone was super hot about RAG, etc., etc. And the reason for that was, yes, it allows you to do better searches, but it also allows you to not just feed a massive document into the context. So initially, it was really more like an optimization type of system. But now what we've discovered is that, yes, that's great, but it's not accurate enough. Like, I'm still getting garbage. I'm still spending way too much token on what I'm feeding to my model. And we started to overlay a lot more around graphs, around context, around like intelligence about how all these data points connect to each other. And the reason for that is just how accurate is the data that you're feeding. Because if you're feeding the most accurate data, one, you will get the ARI that you want, but also you will be saving a lot on token costs. And when we benchmark what people get by feeding the Airbyte context store with the data that they have, there are specific workflow that can go down to like 90% saving of token, just because the data that they get, the data that they process and that they operate on has just been set to the minimum while still getting the best outcome. And that's where what you're saying resonates a lot, which is evals become the most important asset that you have when you're building agents, because that is the thing that will allow you to optimize your cost. It will allow you to, yes, you can start playing with the most expensive model, build your evals based on that, and then you can start degrading what models you're using to make sure that you're using the cheapest one that gets you closer to whatever you're evaluating toward.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is caching can go a long way, semantic caching, and I'm surprised it hasn't come up yet. But we have seen customers save a lot of money, especially in contexts where you have a very large user base that is asking sort of similar queries.
Yeah, similar question, sure. Yeah.
It might not be possible when you have 20 people in your org who are asking very different things. But certainly for consumer type applications, caching has a huge leverage over cost.
Yeah, I would totally echo that. We have 2 more topics, so let me just skip to the next one. The next one is security. And I guess securing agents is like a whole deep topic on it itself. But just for the panelists here, what are best practice in thinking about how you guardrail agents in production? I'm thinking about customer-facing agents mostly, making sure that they don't access things that they're not supposed to, or don't say things that they're not supposed to. Obviously, we have observability tools, but there seems to be a lot of, I guess, missing critical components to actually guardrail our agents. What have you guys seen in practice? What are some failures that you've seen, tips that you have?
I can go. So this is still a rapidly evolving field, because people are only now sort of waking up to the fact that this is also a thing they need to do. There's a lot of people trying to figure out agent identity. How do you make sure that an action that an agent takes is identified as an agent action? The second big piece is, how do you separate out your actual credentials from whatever the agent is doing? And so you need some sort of credential broker, which lets you give your agent very specific permissions and also short-lived tokens. And I think that's the direction the industry is going in, where a lot of ID providers are going to have these agentic identity solutions, which will allow you to give your agents short-lived tokens that do one thing and one thing only. You also will need to figure out how to make certain agent actions reversible, because invariably agents are going to make mistakes. And especially if you're looking at agents that are transforming business data, you want to, the business application that you're building has to be able to recover from that. And finally, you need notions of thresholds at which you'd have to involve a human in the loop. And that's incredibly important to prevent against runaway costs or something else. And so all of these systems are very early right now, but they're going to become core parts of how we manage and how we allow agents to do more without running the world over with paper clips.
Yeah,
I would just add, like, if you could maybe opine on like whether new infrastructure is actually needed. Can we get by with like just defining a new role in our IDP solutions, or do we actually need like a new protocol, a new do you think?
Yeah, so I'll preface it by saying everything's like pretty new right now, and everyone's just trying to figure it out. There are like mainly two approaches to this. One is you give agent an identity, and agent acts like a normal sort of employee in your organization would, with some level of privileges and some level of sort of access. The other is agent acts on behalf of someone, and you're basically borrowing the access that the particular user has. When it comes to sort of acting on behalf of a user, like I think the world kind of solved for it using OAuth and a bunch of other sort of things. And you essentially have, like, at least for most major sort of tools out there, a very good sort of scoping mechanism based on like sort of the OAuth scopes, a pretty decent sort of like access control mechanism.
But those
And
have to, those access controls for OAuth need to be defined a priori, right? And they're static.
yes,
Right. So
and it's a bit of infrastructure work. So we actually do that in our product. So I'm like very familiar with it. It's a lot of like sort of hard work, but like once you sort of get it going, it's actually pretty easy to sort of keep adding new sort of tools and making agents sort of act on behalf of user and sort of interact with the tool. The hard part is basically like the two sort of nuances here. One is your agent could be prompt injected, agent could essentially have a bunch of other sort of vectors, and this is very similar to how a human could be socially injected by a bunch of different ways, right? And figuring out that is something which is more real time, because agent is still accessing the right tool with the right permission. It's just doing it maliciously, right? And that requires a lot of, like, for us at least, real time sort of dynamically observing the tool calls that are happening, figuring out like whether this seems like a sort of out of pattern tool call or something like that, and sort of like injecting a bunch of things to prevent that. When it comes to sort of agent identity as a whole, I don't think industry has like figured out a solution yet. And there are a bunch of different sort of ways out there, and everyone's just trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah, on that front, like we've all faced the Okta UI, like giving us an identity, roles, etc., etc. I don't think it's going to be that different for when we're thinking about agents. And the thing that we should be also careful when we're thinking about like the security of agents, even the system that we have for human is imperfect. Like you can be given a role that you should not have access to, and that's a place where it still works for humans. And using very similar type of technology and fundamentals for like security and agents is just going to be the way it goes in the future. Like at some point, yes, you will have to give access to an agent to manipulate Rippling's data. If you mess up your role and that agents can see all the salaries from your company, well, that's a configuration issue. It's not an agent issue. That's also an issue we face with humans today. So at the end of the day, it's just going to be, well, you need to have this permissioning, you need to have these identities, and you need to manage them well. And you need to make sure that your agents runs with the right set of, like the right identity.
yeah, yeah, this is a hot topic of a debate, and we're on the cutting edge here. I will say that a lot of our portfolio companies are struggling with, I guess, scanners of all sorts, because they're basically benchmark based. So any anomaly, like behavioral benchmark based anomaly detection, is totally off when it comes to an agent. I mean, it looks like a superhuman like accessing all my systems of record, but it might be totally legitimate. I want the agent to do that. Anyways, for the last question, then we're going to turn it over to the audience. One of the hardest challenges that we keep hearing is hiring good technical talent, especially when it comes to setting up your infrastructure. And I'm wondering, you guys all are part of this wave of companies. What are some like hiring tips that you have in identifying talent that can really help you? Do you have any tips and tricks on testing for ability and making sure that the candidates are well qualified?
Yeah, actually, I've changed my way of evaluating people when I bring people at Airbyte. I used to put like capabilities very much above, and today it's a lot more around like the curiosity. So curiosity has become my number one.
Curiosity, yeah.
Yeah, and the reason is very simple. Like just the world is moving at a pace that we've probably never seen before. And you cannot just have people who rely on their existing and past capabilities to actually be an efficient person in your team that is going to just build the best product. You need to have people that keep searching for what is a new way of doing what I was doing before in this new world. And that is something that we've been pushing really, really hard on.
That's great. Yeah.
I think in the old days, you kind of asked engineers if they had any hobby projects. Today, you ask everyone, and you have to show code. What have you done? Because everyone can build anything with vibe coding or cloud code these days. And so I completely agree about your point about curiosity. And curiosity typically leads to people trying something out using one of these coding agents. So if you haven't built anything, then especially if you haven't built anything and put it on render,
Excuse, yeah.
yeah, if you're interviewing with render, then maybe you're the right fit.
Yeah, maybe like I think it very much relates to the curiosity point, but a slightly different perspective to it is like, obviously like startup employees, engineers like needs to feel comfortable with ambiguity because that's what startups are. But there's another level of ambiguity here about their craft, right? So like understanding how they feel about, some of these people have been coding since they were like 7-year-olds and suddenly all that skill is like not as relevant as it used to be. So how do they feel about that? How do they respond to that? I mean, so curious about new tools and approaches, or like, are they, yeah, like not too sure about it, because the pace of change is just going to increase, and you kind of need people who are very, very flexible and continuing to learn, improving, and finding it exciting versus a threat to all the effort they've put into their craft up until that point.
What I can tell you is that any person that you're trying to hire that says, oh, all this vibe coding thing is bullshit, that's a pretty big red flag.
I'm old enough to remember the day where you list all the languages. Like,
Oh, yeah.
And it's totally not even relevant. Who cares?
Yeah.
All right, let's open it up. When you guys ask the question, if you want to direct it to a specific panelist, that'll help us move faster and get more people in.
So ontologies are any of your radars?
The question is, are ontologies on any of our radars?
100%. I think this is really the way you get agents to figure out the organic knowledge that you have at your organization and how your business is actually working. And I think right now what we are doing is we're basically building the foundation of what ontology should look like for agents through technology, but we're adding this layer of intelligence on top of it when it comes to, hey, how do you connect all these entities together? How do you make sure that if Michel is on this system, is the same Michel on this system, and they are spending this amount of money. So that is something that is being built right now. And I think it's going to go a lot faster than what we've done before with analytics system, where it was very manual. Here, agents, you can just let them roam free on your data, and they can figure out links that were very expensive to create before. Like, how do you tie Michel with a misspelling? But with all this adjacent data, you're actually able to link these entities together. And that to me is really where the world is going, is just we're building the infrastructure to get there.
So a bit of an ambiguous question for all of you. What today is speculative that you think will be obvious in the next 6 months to a year?
That you need to steer your coding agents to do a good work. I do believe that in 6 months, you will be able to get a lot more done without that much human intervention to build amazing products. Is that obvious?
Yeah, let's go back here.
Yeah, thanks for the great discussion. I'm going to lever on the router. There's a kind of optimization the router is saying into your products. Is it like, is it a mistake policy by the team? Is it a learning router? Is it agent? It's a tool. How are we actually deciding whether to route the question?
Yeah, so I think the question is, for a given query, how you decide what model to route it to, what infrastructure to route it to.
So we see people doing all kinds of things. It really depends on the nature of your application. So we've seen everyone be like, well, you know what, I'm just going to let Claude decide. And most people are happy with that. There are also folks who have constraints like, well, I need the query to go across maybe all the models, but return results the fastest. And that, again, depends on the use case. Or I need this to be the cheapest. Again, it's a kind of query where quality is approximately good enough for even with the cheaper models. I don't think anyone is doing truly dynamic routing. There are actually a few companies that try to do that. I haven't seen them get a ton of traction.
Yeah, I'll say like I think LLM as a judge is still basically the way that most people are doing this. It got a lot of backlash. It reminds me a little bit of the like old ML days when we ensemble a bunch of models. We would begin it with a classifier typically and then shoot it down a path. And I think the same kind of pattern is existing here. The problem is that to evaluate, to even do some like I guess pre-evaluation can often be extremely expensive and latent. So it's a tougher challenge with LLMs.
So there's some of these are like 100 regions on the open free with the Python plug you see and manage the organization, inventory, whatever you think.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is, if you're running a lot of agents, how do you coordinate them?
Yeah, we talk for our own product. You can use Composio to do all of that. You can see exactly what actions agents are doing and like when are they doing it and what tools are being called with what arguments and everything. And yeah, it's pretty useful. Apart from our product, there are a couple of other sort of internal tools that we have just created because it's just so much easier to render them in a very nice sort of way where like the actionable intelligence exists, like where we could like go week on week and figure out like what we need to change. So yeah, it's pretty much a combination of those two.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously there's like, we do some of the observability, deterministic side, but I think the concept of just like a meta harness is going to become more and more popular because we just see like another layer and another layer versus, even though we offer that like a deterministic UI where you can go and see everything, it's just, we're talking about 100 now, maybe 1,000 next month. So you probably need an agent to manage your agents. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing there. I think the notion of durable workflows is actually pretty powerful here because you can see when there's a parent agent that's then invoking other agents, you can kind of see everything that's happening in your system. You can let the parent task sort of sleep while the child agents are running. And so if you're really looking to observe a bunch of agents that get spun up as a result of a single call, then looking at a workflows product is probably a good option. And we just happen to have one.
I think, going back to your question about like what might not be obvious today, this question reminded me of a belief that I have that managing agents is essentially just managing state. And so I think of logs actually less as like, or I think of agents less as instances of compute, if this makes sense, and more as just a log or like a state. And so the question is, how do you coordinate the state across different compute entities? And so there's kind of like, I guess to explain a little further, there's kind of two approaches. You can have an orchestration type of platform like a temporal ingest type of thing, and then manage state that way, or you can try to sync the state through some sort of like sync engine and get the orchestration largely for free. I don't know if that was too abstract for you guys, but that's a hot debate that our company is having. So yeah, maybe last question from the audience, and then we'll do lightning. Yeah, there in the back, the lady.
Anurag startup got initiatives here. We're building AI to help sales teams improve promotion rate with end-to-end development during the commodities department. Curious, like, how are you approaching go-to-market, and what are your challenges right now in that sales and go-to-market?
How are you approaching go-to-market?
I mean, I could just spend all day here and talk about our go-to-market challenges, which I think is, normal.
Going to conferences is a good
Go
idea.
ahead.
Sponsoring conferences is a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, every company is like very, very different, right? Like we're like an open source company, and we have tons of adoption in the open source. And then a lot of these people are converting or having kind of commercial conversations for us. Like one of the things we're trying to figure out is when in their journey is the right time to speak to them. If you speak to them too early, they're not ready to have a commercial conversation. If you speak to them too late, they probably built all the stuff they needed to use the open source, right? And then obviously, like we don't have telemetry because it's open source, so that's one of the challenges we're trying to figure out. So it's both like the tooling and the tech, but also just better understanding how the journey exactly looks like in this category space that's moving insanely fast. But I have many, many more challenges if you want to talk about them.
Great. Well, let's end with a lightning round here, and I want each of you guys to answer fairly quickly. Speaking to our founder audience, what is one thing about infrastructure challenges in particular that they should be paying attention to? And it might be something that they're underappreciating, the difficulty of the challenge ahead. Yeah.
Don't use Kubernetes.
You stole my you stole mine. Yeah, just Kubernetes doesn't work, especially with agents having longer and longer horizon to get to their results. Just it's not reliable enough.
Yeah, and I think in that spirit, like just in a more general, because again, things move so fast, it's like just try to, especially in the early days, try to keep it as simple as possible. It's very easy to adopt the hot next thing like every day, every week, but the reality is like simple is usually the right way to go.
I guess like not to repeat, so then security with LLMs is a nightmare and people don't realize it yet.
Yep. Definitely. Thanks, guys. Please join me in giving a round of applause.